I'm a huge fan of Dawn of the Dead, and I love horror movies in general. I was studying more about it because of this interview, and I didn't realize how highly appreciated that film was. Like, it's in like the top 100 best movies of all time, and your death scene is like the top 10 zombie deaths of all time. Like,
sure, that's 40 some years ago. So a lot of films have been made since then. So to be able to hold that ranking over those years, at one time, I think my death scene was one of the 5 top zombie death scenes of all times, and now it's one of the top 8. So I'm still good with that. No, I've traveled to Germany a couple times to do shows, to the UK several times for conventions, and there you meet fans from all over Europe, Japan, Canada, all through the United States. There are fans all over from Dawn of the Dead. It's been translated into so many languages, and in a lot of countries you'll find posters in those languages. Everything from like Thailand to Italy to wherever. And so just to be part of something that's so fantastically widespread and so well known, it's been an honor.
So normally when we start our interviews, we ask the people, what is your favorite movie of all time?
And I can't answer that question. I have
you got to answer. Give me a top 5, top 10.
I can't. I honestly don't think like that. I have, and a lot of stuff. I mean, based on what people know me for, I have I love horror movies, and I'm very familiar and versed in horror movies, and many of my favorites are there. But I like movies of like all sorts, most sorts anyway. From all times, from countries all over the world. You'd probably learn more about me by just me saying things. I mean, I love, I love older films. I'm a film historian. I'm very interested in how this medium came to be and how it developed and how the language of film developed. I love black and white. I love silent films. I have a big affection for silent comedy. I have my probably the horror movies that had the most influence on me are older black and white horror films. And although I've continued to keep up with everything in the genre pretty much since, I don't usually I'm not a fan of things like top 10 lists and the best of lists and things like this, because I think ultimately that comes down to opinions in so many cases, and everyone is going to have a different opinion and a different point of view and come from a different place. So
right.
I can't. It's not the question. Every time I'm asked that question, I feel stuck because it's not like I have like an immediate like go-to list, like boom, 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 boom. I'm always looking for my new favorite movie.
Right. Yeah, me too. And about black and white movies, like, I love them. Like, they cannot be replicated. There's some beauty to it that cannot be captured nowadays.
Well, I think in the days of black and white, and I think this has to do also with just the previous decades and the way that art was looked at, etc. But especially like the studio films from like the 20s into the 50s are just like gorgeous looking for the most part. The craftsmanship is like primary in those films. I think it's something we've sort of fallen away from over the years in many ways. I think I think people still can make great looking films, but I think less emphasis is put on that. I think less emphasis is put on making the image the primary thing.
Right. And I also feel like due to CGI, there's a huge lack of creativity, because if I want a dragon in my movie back in, in the 50s or the 20s or whatever, I'm going to have to figure out how to make a dragon, Yeah. But in CGI, you can just go poof, a dragon,
Right. And I mean, I think CGI is a great advancement. I think there's a lot of wonderful stuff that we've never been able to do before that CGI lends itself to. But as I'm constantly reminded, and as fans of my films talk about all the time, there's a real, amongst people who love film, who know film, there's a preference for the older style of a lot of these type of effects. And I think that's partially just because there's there's like an unconscious, like a sort of a subliminal reaction that your mind and your sensibilities has to a lot of this stuff. It's like CGI can look great in terms of like detail, and it has this sense of realism. But I guess what bothers me with a lot of CGI is it looks what I call hyper real. It looks like, yeah, it looks real, but I've never seen anything real that looks like this in terms of how it moves, in terms of how it feels. In fact, if I saw this on the street, I would say, wow, that looks like CGI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt like that about Transformers. I thought it was like, wow, they look so good. But I never thought this is a real machine flipping around.
Well, that's the thing. I think what CGI artists do and have been doing for quite a number of years at this point is they're so enamored of the level of detail that they can get to, because they can. You can have amazing fine detail, but in real life, your eye can't even perceive that much detail in most things.
Right.
You know? The Transformers, you see them on screen, and it's like your brain is basically telling you, all right, this can't be real because there is nothing that exists that looks like that.
Right. Yeah, I think just the mix of the two. I think you don't need to use CGI for like absolutely everything, and I think that's the biggest problem. CGI is obviously a great tool, but they just use it for stuff they don't even have to, you know?
I feel like it's used in just, you know, average everyday movies that don't even necessarily require special effects. It's used as basically a safety measure too, because so many times a tiny detail they want to change, or they have something they want to take out of a shot, and bam, they can do it now. Mm-hmm. And I think it's part of what's made filmmakers lazier.
That's like in E.T. when they replaced the guns with the walkie-talkies.
Right. But that was for a different reason, but yeah.
Right. Well, Steven Spielberg came back and said that he regretted that now, so that's good.
That was basically him at the time doing what he thought was politically correct due to whatever the climate of things at that time was, you know, in that year. And I don't know. I mean, I you know, you look back on it, and now, I mean, you know, there's even more, I think, awareness and emphasis on things that people might be sensitive to one way or another. And my feeling is like you make something, you make a film, or you write something, it should stand as what it is when it was done, when it was created, and it exists in the context of being created then.
Right. And then also, if you chase what's politically correct currently, that will never end. I think every 5 years you'd have to make a new E.T. at that point.
Sort of, yeah. But I think we've been it for the past few years, and I don't know how long it will continue. But the whole there's such a rebellion now to political correctness and you know, all this other stuff. And my feeling is it's like anything else. It's like suddenly there's a realization that something may have been like unfair, or somebody may not have been treated properly, but then there's a tremendous overcompensation to try and correct that, and it takes a while for things to balance out, I think.
Yeah, I was talking to my dad about this interview that I had with you and how I was so excited about it, and some of the stuff that I had learned while I was doing research for this, and I was talking to him about how it was so beloved, and he's never seen it. He's not a big monster movie guy, but he was like, why does everybody like it so much? And I was like, well, I think it's because a smart person made it and actually thought about what it would actually be like and actually put a lot of thought into it. I compared it to like the Terminator, which could have easily been a really silly movie, but they sat there and figured out the time travel theories and all that kind of stuff. So a smart person can sit there and go, like, there are all these different ideas that you can go deeper and deeper with it. Like, the deeper you go, the deeper there is to go with all the thinking about how what it would actually be like, So I think it's a very well made film and a smart film.
Well, a lot of people, Josh, have asked me, well, when you were involved with the making of Dawn of the Dead, did you know it was going to be this worldwide sensation and a cult favorite? And my answer is always, nobody has a clue, because it's not up to the director. It's not up to a particular actor or the entire ensemble of actors, the crew, the producers. It's not up to them whether or not it becomes a hit movie. It's up to the fans. So you have to do something besides just put on a pretty show. You have to have something that really people can identify with and get pulled into and have fun with, and maybe come away with both an appreciation for the film, but some of the concepts that it's talking about. There was, the whole social aspect that George Romero put into his films. It's something that we live on a day-by-day basis with. In fact, George Romero, who directed all these, was asked once on a radio show, well, why do you think zombies are so scary? I mean, there's Dracula, there's Godzilla, there's all these monsters. Why are zombies so scary? And George's answer is pretty simple. He said it's because they're your neighbors.
Wow. Yeah, that's true. And also, zombies represent death, because there are real, like, if someone dies, that's what they're going to look like eventually. They're not up moving around yet, but that there are real things that look like that. If a dead person's laying there, eventually they're going to rot and they're going to look exactly like a zombie, so it's kind of I think it's a primal fear of death that makes zombies so scary.
Well, that's why the people who were alive run away from them.
Right. So I wanted to ask you this. Outside of the movies that you are in yourself, what's one of your favorite movies, or a couple of your favorite movies?
Oh, have to say Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Oh my gosh. I love that so much. I literally have like a shrine to Creature from the Black Lagoon in my room. I made it myself. I got all of the autographs of the original acters, and
Hugh Browning, and yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Ben Chapman.
Ben Chapman, excellent. I missed him while he was still with us, but Julie Adams.
Yes, I have all their autographs, and I have like this giant canvas, and the canvas is covered in like all this seaweed and stuff like that. It has like figures coming out of it, and I have all the autographs like pinned inside there, and I have the posters all over my room. I didn't realize how much, like, every once in a while you have one of those self-aware moments and you're like, wow, I just have a complete room full of black.
Well, let me throw a question at you, Josh. You asked about Dawn of the Dead and its popularity, and I said I like Creature from the Black Lagoon. You got very excited because you obviously have a liking for the creature, and there are different sites out there just of people who like Creature from the Black Lagoon. Why do you think that is?
I think that, for me personally, there's a reality to it for some reason. I guess some horror movies are very, very far-fetched, but that one, I mean, there's probably not actually a gill man, but there are animals and creatures that we're not aware of. And also the filmography, like I always think about him swimming underwater, and those are just such beautiful shots to me. I don't know why I love them so much, but I just love the way it looks. And I think it's something like that. It's kind of like with zombies, there could be, like, there probably aren't going to be zombies, but there is death and there are things that look like that. And also there are creatures that we're unaware of, in places we've never been. And so it's possible to find creatures out there, out in the world. So maybe it's something like that. I don't know. What do you think? What do you like about it?
Oh, I think you hit on a lot of good things. One is the cinematography, the characters. You have kind of good guys, bad guys. They have a little conflict going on. But but the creature just, he wasn't necessarily intruding on somebody else's space, coming out of the water or out of the jungle just to attack cities or something. He just was kind of protecting his lair and the heritage. So if you remember, there's this claw embedded in the cliff that they're digging out and trying to identify. Well, if it's embedded in a cliff, that gives you an idea that that's been around for a very, very long time, that as a species. And so, there's always this push-pull of we should catch this thing and put it in a cage, or we should let it go on in its natural environment and see what happens. Maybe we could study it that way, or we should open it up and see what's inside. And I think the way the creature kind of defends his lair, his lagoon, is something any of us might try to do too. And in a sense, it sort of flips the whole, who are the real creatures here? I mean, is it the creature from the Black Lagoon who's just kind of minding his own business until these intrusive people come in? Or is it these people who want to, shoot him, capture him, cage him, do whatever they want to do with him? And so I think there's a lot more sympathy for the creature in that case than there are for most of the other actors who were involved in the film.
Yeah, I agree. I think that he is very, he never seemed like a mean, like an evil creature or anything like that. He seemed really chill, but people were like attacking him and kidnapping him and stuff like that, So I always thought he seemed nice in better circumstances,
How did you end up getting into Dawn of the Dead?
My partner Brendan and I got word that there was a sequel to Night of the Living Dead being made in Monroeville, near Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania, and that was like, wow, well, we obviously have to go and be in it, and we knew they needed zombie extras, and unfortunately there was just a major blizzard that day that we set out, so we drove for 12 hours in like totally blinding snow, and finally got out there and spent the weekend on the set, and that was a great experience because it was just like, just walking in blind. I did some interviews. I did interview George Romero and Tom Savini and Ken Foray and other cast members, and there was. I think it was still the production itself. I mean, Dawn, despite the fact that it's now considered like a milestone classic, at the time was not exactly a big budget film. It was like really like not too much over $1 million.
Wow.
Which at the time was like a reasonable amount of money, but it was not a big budget film by any means.
Right.
And so we got onto it. We were cast as zombies. We got into a scene which we thought we could cut out of the film because Romero, when we got there, was improvising stuff. He had shot almost everything he needed, and he had a little time and money, and he was just playing with ideas that he thought maybe he could use. And that one of those was the scene towards the climax where the biker gang breaks into the mall, and then they're messing around with the zombies, and they break into a bakery and they start hitting the zombies with pies, right?
Right.
So my partner and other friends of mine got hit with pies, and I got sprayed in the face with seltzer by Tom Savini.
That's awesome. That's my favorite part of the movie. That was cool.
Yeah, well, that was like so. That's when when we were there, and Romero said, "Well, here's what I want to do." I realized, all right, this is like different than any movie I can think of. I don't think any other horror movie has gone from like explicit gore to like this kind of like basically just slapstick and suddenly having fun.
Right.
And I think he didn't know if it would work, and I guess in the cutting he must have gotten great reactions because it's all still in the movie. So I'm in a scene that's fairly well known, and I have a part that I can point out and say, "Hey, look, I'm the seltzer zombie." Right.
Yeah, I feel like it worked because the rest of the movie is so stressful that it's like, okay, good. Oh, because you just feel like the entire movie, because it's very realistic. I feel like if that were to happen, as realistic as a zombie movie can be, You know, I think that's why it struck a chord with so many people, because it's like he really sat down and thought this out. Okay, what would happen if this really actually happened? And I think that's why it stood
Well,
out.
it was also the first, as far to my knowledge, and I thought so at the time, and I haven't rethought it since, but it was the first action adventure horror film, and that changed the game. If you know what I'm saying, it sort of raised the ante. It wasn't just like, oh, you'll have like 10 minutes and then people will hang out and they'll talk, and then like, oh, and then there's a monster for 2 minutes or something. This movie was like, entirely like at fever pitch almost the entire time.
Right. Yeah. It was very good. I rewatched it again, like in preparation for these, and I was like, this is a very good film. It's a smart movie, and I really appreciate it a lot.
So you're in Dawn of the Dead, and were you an actor before that? What was going on in your life at that time that brought you into that? How did you end up in that movie?
Well, it's kind of a convoluted series of circumstances in a way. I'd been working in theater, live stage productions in the Pittsburgh area, and we had a traveling repertory company. We were everywhere from Chicago to Boston to North Carolina to Scotland, doing performances. So I was used to being, on camera. Well, I wouldn't say on camera, but in the eyes of people. And the other thing was, Tom Savini and I had been in college together. Tom did all the makeup and special effects for Dawn of the Dead. And in college, we had a separate alternative kind of theater company, and we worked together on that. After college, we both went into the Army. Tom went in as a combat medic or as a combat photographer in Vietnam, and I went to Vietnam as a combat medic. So we had our own different experiences of what real gore was like, and what effects things could have on the human body. It's a heck of a laboratory to study those sorts of things. But after we came back, I worked for a couple of years and then decided to go back to Pittsburgh. I wasn't originally from there, but I ran into Tom, and Tom said, hey, I've got this great role. George Romero's doing a movie. And another one, since he did Night of the Living Dead about 10 years earlier, this is going to be a big one, and I've got a great role for you. So I knew Tom, and you have to trust the people who you've worked with, who you've been friends with, and you've had experiences with. So I kind of went with it. I made it over to his workshop where we did the head castings to get all the prosthetics together. And a couple of weeks later, I showed up on set and got made up there and waited around a day watching a movie get made until the helicopter came in the next day and there wasn't any more rain coming down. Then the rest sort of became history.
Yeah. See, I had read that you were friends with Tom Savini. I've been doing the show for about a year now, and he pops up quite often with other people that I've interviewed, like a legend. Like, it's so crazy that you just happen to know him. I did an interview with the guy that played Jason Voorhees, and he had done the makeup for that as well, and like a million other things.
Ari Lehman?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. He's a good friend too.
Wow, you got a pretty cool club.
Well, nice. We go to, let's say, a film convention or horror convention. I'd say there's somebody from Friday the 13th. Oh, there's Freddy Krueger. Whoa, there's the creature from. So unless you're just so shy, you just kind of hide from everybody. You got to go over and say hello, and talk to them about film and what they did, and tell that whether you enjoyed it. You say, I really like you in that role, and you get. You do that a couple times over the years, and you get to know people, and you socialize a little bit. everybody's on different schedules. They live in different places. So oftentimes the conventions may be the only place you get back together.
Right, like a little family reunion.
Mhm.
That's cool. I like Ari a lot. He's a very nice guy. I want to meet Tom at some point. Like, I would love to talk to him. I'm in awe of the work he's done. And so you knew him from a theater company?
Well, as I said, we were in college together, both studying journalism in Pittsburgh.
Oh, wow.
And although the school owned the Pittsburgh Playhouse, they had a theater program. But since we were in journalism, but we wanted to do acting, we were part of a group that formed its own theater company inside the school without being part of the Pittsburgh Playhouse. So we did a number of pieces. Tom and I actually did a two-person play together, Zoo Story by Edward Albee. And that was an interesting experience too. I like Tom. He always had a lot of energy and immense talent. And, as soon as Star Wars came out, bam, he went and built himself a Darth Vader outfit. I mean, you say, well, you couldn't find that on the shelf somewhere. And I think that's one of the strengths Tom always had. It didn't have to be something that was out there that you picked up and put on. It just had to be something that was, bam, in his head. If you can see it, visualize it, then you can find ways to create those materials and create that look. And I think that's what gave Tom an edge when it came to something like Dawn of the Dead. And he was in charge of so many different special effects. I mean, bam, one after another. And to do all of those safely, with interest, with ingenuity, and oftentimes using new materials or using old materials in new ways. And to literally be able to pull it off, I thought was pretty awesome.
Right. He's very, very creative. Like, I've read a little bit about, like, what he was using to make y'all's makeup and the effects and stuff. All very impressive and creative. And it comes across great. It all looks amazing. When you were being a zombie, what were you thinking? Like, what were you doing? Like, how
could I think? I'm a zombie.
Right. Well, what were your instincts then as a zombie?
Well, it's my instinct. I mean, I sort of, I'm conscious enough to like see things and walk around and be uncoordinated, etc. But George had to give me some special direction because when Savini came up and hit me in the face with the seltzer, it was like bang right in the eyes, which kind of hurt. And I reacted. George was going, no, you can't react. You're a zombie. I have to say, all right, well, yeah, but this is like two sticks being poked in my eyes. Right. So I managed to get a couple of good takes off, but it was the kind of thing where I wasn't prepared for how much pain there would be involved.
Yeah, I've spilled like carbonated drinks on myself, and it burns, and I can only imagine in the eyes, so not feel good. So so obviously, Dawn of the Dead inspired basically most of the zombie stuff that we have now, whether it be
Dawn of the Dead is I mean, Night of the Living Dead alone was a landmark film, and it sort of approached horror in a different way. It was kind of a throwback to the older black and white horror movies, but at the same time, it was looking forward in terms of how explicit you could get and how really like horrible things could get. And Dawn, I think, was similarly innovative in different ways. At the time, I'm sure Romero didn't realize it was going to become such a major trend. Right. And I think what it eventually turned into, I mean, it's now, like one of the staples of horror, just the cannibalistic zombie or the homicidal zombie. I'm not a big fan of fast-moving zombies myself, mainly because the term zombie essentially means it's a living dead body. It's not supposed to be able to run. For me, right. Once they start running, they're just like monsters possessed or they have a disease or something, but they're not zombies.
Right. Yeah, that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you. If somehow that were to happen, how would you think they would be? Like, do you think it'd be more like Dawn of the Dead, or do you think it'd be like...
Well, if corpses were to be reanimated, first of all, I mean, the human body, once it's actually dead, does kind of stiffen up a lot. It's not like, I mean, when some of these films where the zombies are like, marathon runners, basically. And that type of stuff could be effective. I think, in particular, I think some of the Korean zombie films and recent TV series have done like an awful lot to make that work.
Right.
It's a different dynamic. The Romero zombie and everything that sort of came from that is very dependent. It's slow moving, but there's an awful lot of them, and eventually you're going to get into a situation where you can't really do anything about them.
Right. Yeah. So in that scenario, what are you going to do? Say tomorrow there's a zombie apocalypse and you want to live, obviously. So what are you going to do?
Well, nowadays, I sort of feel like everybody would take a similar attitude in that, well, I've seen a million of these movies. I know exactly what to do. And
right.
then you probably found that in real life, that what works in the movies doesn't work.
Right. Yeah, because everybody can't live in Walmart, because that would be what I would want to do. Just go hide in Walmart.
Yeah, because and it's weird too, because it's like, I mean, I realized like with the COVID thing, it's like, and so many people just blew it off or didn't want to get vaccinated or whatever. And at that point I realized, all right, if we actually had what would be considered a zombie apocalypse, everybody would be a zombie because no one would pay attention. People would get sick so quickly that there'd be no going back.
I agree. I have a very low view of general humanity, so I feel like 90% of people would be zombies, like that fast.
And they'd be, and as they were turning into zombies, they'd be denying that they were zombies.
Yeah. Like, no, you're a zombie. Yeah, that fits into my worldview perfectly.
How long were you in the makeup chair?
Well, as I said, I went to Tom's workshop, and he had to make a full head cast. So he did it the front and the back separately. And so when he did the front, he uses a kind of a plastic material called alginate, which fills in all of the details. But literally, you're breathing through a straw while that happens.
Ooh, I've done that.
So that has to firm up. Once that firms up, then the plaster goes over top of that, because the alginate itself is flexible to pick up the details in your face, but it will also just kind of flop down on a table because it is so, in a sense, fluid. And then, so breathing through a straw for like half an hour or so, something like that. Again, you got to trust the people you're working with, because your nose is closed off and you can't see, you really can't hear. Or your communication with the outside world is through that straw, and you're trying to be still until it all hardens and firms up. But we did that, and a couple of days later, Tom gave me a call and said, Jim, we're going to have to do it again. The plaster cracked.
Oh no.
So, well, I had the time, so I did it. And we did the recasting, and I liked it about as much as I did the first time. And from that, he made the head, made a bust of my head, and was able to, take his time working on the prosthetics and put materials together on the plaster bust that might have been, a little angry to the skin if it went directly on the skin. But so he could make all of these things that firmed up, and then he could take those pieces. And then when I got to the small airport outside of Monroeville, where you see in the picture behind me here with the helicopter and the boxes and the little pad, and there's a little administration building, and inside that building is where all the makeup was being done. So I went in and got set up. It was my first time on a film set, so I had no idea who anybody else was. I knew Tom, and that was about it. I later found that there were a number of people that I'd worked with in theater in Pittsburgh who were also in Dawn of the Dead. And that includes people like at the very beginning of the film, David Early and David Crawford, the two people who were arguing back and forth. Nick Tallow, who's one of the raiders or the bikers, and a couple other folks that I'd worked with in theater. They were in Dawn of the Dead also. But since their material or their scenes were done at the mall, I had no idea. I was on set for 2 days. And so I was in makeup, and then next day we get in makeup again. And I guess it took, I don't know, maybe a little over an hour, hour and a half, something like that, to get into it, simply because Tom had to design the pieces to fit so well. And he was working also with Jeannie Jeffries, who's the blonde zombie from Dawn of the Dead. She was also doubling as a makeup assistant. So I'm pretty sure we've sort of agreed, even though we didn't know each other at the time, that she's the one who probably helped put all the finishing details on me after Tom, went over things with her.
Oh, cool. That's neat. How did they make your head come off? How did they make the top of your head come off?
Magic. Just movie magic. The head bust that Tom made of me, he added about 1.5 inches at the top, which included like kind of a foam rubbery material, which was then cut into chunks. And so it was still, circular, whatever, but those chunks were threaded together with monofilament fishing line with space in between, so that you had extra line in between. And then, of course, the hair was put on top and such. So when I climb up onto the boxes to get hit by the helicopter blades, which were animated in, by the way, I was not actually under rotating helicopter blades. Although at the time I could have well been. It's just, you get caught up in the moment. But using the same kind of clear monofilament fishing line off camera, somebody tugs onto the top of that, yanks it, and so it comes off in a series of chunks in a nice straight line, just like zoom. And behind these boxes that you see, Tom and one of his assistants were there with these hand pumps that were filled with the blood material. And there were tubes running up the back of my trousers, up the back of my shirt, back of my neck, to connect to the pieces of appliance that were embedded into these headpieces. So at that, it was a matter of very precise timing. When Tom gave the signal, that came off, they started pumping, and everything else just kind of flowed from there, so to speak, including all the blood. And fortunately, I looked over, and after I got up, and George was smiling, and everybody looked very, very pleased. And then they went on to the next scene.
So, of all this new media that has come about of all the zombie stuff, what are you liking? Like, what are you like? That's what I'm talking about.
Specifically the zombie genre. As I mentioned, I've liked stuff I've seen come out of Korea in the past few years. There was Train to Busan, which I think sort of was the first really big film that had international success. And then there were several TV series that were out in the past few years that I thought were pretty impressive. We Are All Dead at a high school. I don't know if you saw that. It was like 12 episodes of high school kids trapped at their school fighting zombies, and I it's like I sort of feel like if this was done as an American series, it would get tiresome after 3 episodes or something. It would just start to get it would drag. I just instinctively feel that. This just somehow worked. It felt very fresh. the dramatic situations work. There were entire 1 hour episodes that were nothing but suspense and action, and that's something you really don't see in episodic television now.
Huh? I'm gonna have to look that up. I've never heard of that. Do you really play video games or not really?
I play video games, but infrequently. And to tell the truth, part of it is sort of like a number of years back. I realized after sitting like down and like getting up 8 hours later after playing video games, I realized, all right, I have to not get addicted to this.
Right.
Because I have so many other things I'm interested in and so many other distractions. And meanwhile, I sort of want to create and do things, and you have to sort of you have to draw lines somewhere. I love a million things. I'm very inspired by things. It's like, for me, it's like, I see a great video game, and I just want to like sort of say, all right, I need to take a break from the game. I just want to wander this environment and see what's here.
Yeah, I'm the same way. See, I feel exactly the same way you do, because I do a lot of stuff. Like if I'm not doing the interviews, I'm doing my shows on Bourbon, and I'm actually making a film by myself where I play every character, and it's over 2 hours, and it's all shot on the green screen, and I've been working on it for 2 years. But during the pandemic, I don't know how I ran into it, but I played Resident Evil.
Right.
And I was in love. I have every single one of them I could buy after that. Have you ever played those?
I have. Actually, the last time I actually played Resident Evil was probably one of the much earlier editions of the game, where probably within the first 5 or 6 years or so, I'm thinking, when the first ones came out. And at that time, that was like pretty impressive, even though by today's standards, it's like, it's almost nothing.
Yeah. If you get a chance, you should check out some of the newer ones, because they directly stated that Dawn of the Dead was one of their biggest influences for those games. Right. And that's all I play. Like, I don't play, I'll play them, and then I'll wait till they make a new one, and then never touch my Xbox again. But yeah, I was just going to say, those are great. And it's funny that they actually said specifically the movie that you were in is what gave them the idea to do it at all.
It's interesting because I'm not a fan of the Resident Evil movies. I feel like they just threw away the premise of the games to do an entirely different type of movie. And unfortunately, they were so popular. They made like 10 of them or whatever. But speaking of CGI, is those movies totally like alienate me ultimately. They so overuse CGI.
I agree. Those movies suck, and I hate those movies, and I am like, it is such an injustice, because the games, they get a little weird sometimes and a little silly, but there's totally some really good movies in there somewhere if you just follow the story of the game.
Yeah, it makes no sense to me when somebody just takes something that has an imaginative premise that you can do all kinds of things with, and then like boils it down to just a few elements, and then that's what they decide to make a movie from.
So, have you been in, I guess since then you probably have, but have you been in close proximity to George Romero very often, or were you during the movie? Or
during the filming, George, of course, was handling most of the direction. But when it came to some of the effects, like my scene particularly, where Tom had been working on this kind of on his own, he told George what was going to be happening. George directed the first part of it, and by the first part of, my scene is when I first appear on screen coming out under the wing of a helicopter, and a newspaper blows by. Well, George, got that together and, sort of set the stage, and the walk across the field, intermittent shots of that. When it came to, climbing up on the boxes and things like that, and at that point, George turned it pretty much over to Tom, because Tom had his people in place and was able to do the cues and knew exactly what was supposed to happen. And they had to be in position. So Tom pretty much directed the scene of the helicopter zombie top coming off and the fall down and the other stuff. Well, I'd say once I started falling, there was no directing. Gravity took care of the rest of that. But so there was that, and I got a little bit of a chance to meet with him during a break, and he was very pleased, and I was very happy to be, part of it. Especially, I'd heard about a lot of movie directors being very not paranoid, but very harsh at times on set, and you didn't want to make a misstep. But George wasn't like that. If you had ideas, you could offer them to George. He was very affable, very personable. And after Dawn of the Dead was released, I think within a year or two, I left Pittsburgh. And I hadn't seen George then for about 20 couple of years after that. And we were doing a convention in Maryland, and it was just amazing to me because there was Night of the Living Dead cast, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, Survival of the Dead, and all of these people I kind of knew through the films, but it always amazes me that all of those people came together because George made the films. They became the stars they became because George cast them, or Tom cast them, put them in the films, and all of these films have become classics. And the rooms are just filled with these people from all the George Romero films. Well, I was in one room with Night of the Living Dead and somebody else, another group of the Dawn folks. George was in another room. So I think it wasn't until like the late afternoon of the second day I even had a chance to go over and see him. And I wanted to say hello. And the lines had gone down to him. I mean, lines were forming 2 hours before he even showed up. That's how popular George was at conventions, because he would also take time to talk with people, and everybody likes a little personal attention. And George, enjoyed hearing people's stories as well. But when I got to see him, he kind of looked at me, and I said, Jim Crut, and he just, gave me a great big hug, and it was just fabulous. And he signed my Ultimate Dawn of the Dead DVD set.
Cool.
And it said something like, Jim, your scene cannot be not quite estimated, but it's been a few years, forgive me. But it was just so touching to me that, he picked up almost like from when we were doing the scene to when he saw me 20 some years later. It was that same joy that he had. And then I saw him at another convention in Gettysburg, and we had a chance to talk a little bit and, get a few photos together, things like that. But George has a lot, at the time, and anytime at a convention, always has a lot of demands. People were wanting something from him, whether a photo, autograph, or his agent says, you got to come over here and do this, or got to meet with these people, or we got to go and give you a break and get you away from all this. So it's not like, hey, well, why don't we just take the afternoon, have lunch, and chat a little bit? So you're kind of grateful for any time you did get together, and I was always pleased for that.
It's so interesting to me that there's been, especially in the past, I'd say decade or so, there's rejection by fans of things like CGI, etc. Not that they're entirely rejecting it, but there's a big desire to see the older type of effects. And in fact, so many people doing genre films now are very conscious of that and are making an effort to do old school effects, knowing that fans are probably going to complain if they don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a human nature to want to see real things, like that's what because there are no stakes in things that are not real. If I see a CGI guy punch another CGI guy, I know that's not.
Yeah, no, my partner Tom had a diatribe about this after like a few of the Marvel movies had come out, And he and I had, we were big comic book fans, and we never thought there would be movies of this scale and quality for Marvel comic books. But at a certain point, he just said, it was after like I think it was when they did maybe the Civil War film or something, that he said, yeah, I used to love all these characters and everything, but I don't want to just see a bunch of cartoons fighting each other. I want to see like people.
Right. Yeah. I like a lot of the Marvel movies. I feel like they're going downhill now.
They are, but I got to tell you, for a long time, I was shocked at how consistent the quality was and how entertaining they were without any of them taking like a real nosedive.
I think that I used to, before I did this show, I did movie reviews. And me and my friend would go sit in the theater, and immediately when the credits rolled, we would shoot in the theater and then get thrown out. And that was normally the end of the review. So I said when we watched Endgame, I was like, this was not as good. And I think this is where it's going to start losing traction, because Infinity War was an incredible film. And then I felt like it was started to slowly decline. And so far, it seems like I was right. But I mean, I hope not. I want them to be good, I like that stuff too.
Yeah, and I think I sort of saw, for me, the death knell for this type of thing started when Marvel started doing like a dozen TV shows almost simultaneously. And I just realized, wow, in the next few years, they're just going to saturate the market with so much that they're going to lose in the end.
Yeah, I was surprised that it didn't do that with just all the movies, honestly. Like, I was like, when is this going to happen? But it didn't. But I have a live show that I have to be at in 30 minutes. So I have to go. But thank you very, very much for talking to me. It's been really fun.
Thank you for having me.
So, in your professional opinion, what are some tips if you're going to play a zombie? What is a good zombie tip? Like acting.
Good question, because Tom and I had never really talked about what it was like to be a zombie up until I got onto set. And then I was in makeup going out to the tarmac, and I said, Tom, he was just checking me for any last minute makeup things. He said, I said, Tom, do these zombies talk? I mean, I had not seen any of the other zombies. I didn't know what they did. Did they walk fast, slow, run, climb, jump? What did they do? Everybody's got a different interpretation. Tom said, well, just be the zombie you want to be. And so literally, I mean, I'd given it some thought, but between the makeup session, final makeup clearance, and then going on set, that's where I put together whatever characteristics I had. So I did a couple conventions, and at one of the conventions, Jeremy Ambler, who was one of the walkers in The Walking Dead, I said, Jeremy, The Walking Dead is very similar to the zombies portrayed in George Romero's films. Of course, Greg Nicotero, who's the executive director of Walking Dead, worked with Tom Savini. He knew George Romero. So he, I think, had been birthed in that approach to zombies, that they were regular people that didn't suddenly become supermen. And I said, well, how about if we do a session, like a panel program, of what I got in terms of training or direction on being a zombie, and you got for The Walking Dead. And we didn't really talk about it much, but we talked the convention promoter into letting us do it. We got, 50 people in the room. And we chatted a bit. And I said, excuse me, I said, Tom basically said, do the zombie you want to do. They don't really talk much, but I said, can I yell? He said, yeah, do whatever you want to do. So it was like total freedom. And then Jeremy comes up and he talks about how they were screened for The Walking Dead. They were chosen kind of based on their looks and then given certain directions. And they literally had a kind of zombie school on how you move, what you don't do. And okay, everybody, don't limp on your left foot. You know, that's been done. Yeah, don't just do something that somebody else has done, but you need to kind of carry these basic moves and then put your own interpretation on them. So that's why even in Walking Dead, where you have hordes and hordes of zombies, there are differences, not just in the looks, but sometimes maybe the personalities. Maybe some of them are a little reticent, some of them are a little bolder, more active, more fierce, more, I'm going to get you by, bite your ankle or something. So we had a good response to that. And we asked people in the audience, do you want to try some of these moves? Who would like to try to be a zombie? And you bet. And so people would come up and it's not that we critiqued them, but we said, based on, the screening school that they had for Walking Dead, what you'd might want to do is not do that, but maybe do more of this. You could maybe tilt your head. You could do something odd. And I always felt from the perspective of if your body was falling apart, what muscle groups would be sort of the first to go that you would lose control over? And I did a convention in Germany a few years back, and we were doing this panel, like folks from, I think most of them were from Dawn of the Dead, and Eugene Clark was there from Land of the Dead. He did a gift to me. Everybody was given a microphone and introduced down the line. And it came to him handing the microphone to me. And he said, well, Jim, instead of just introducing yourself, why don't you show them how to walk like a zombie?
Oh.
So I've got all these people, maybe 100, 150, whatever in the audience. And everybody else has just introduced and said, my name is so-and-so. And I take the microphone. But I got to show them how to do a zombie walk. So anyway, we had a great time doing it. And I gave them a couple little tips. I said, here's one thing to do, and that is to be consistent. If you're doing something, say, with your left arm, well, how are you going to remember after all these people yell directions at you and such, and maybe change your makeup, and, oh, you have to move over here instead of over there? Which arm was it that was going to be twisted or close to get your butt? I said, you could take an object like a ball or an orange, stick it under your arm. You're not going to forget what part doesn't move, and maybe that'll give you kind of a stiff arm look. You could put a pebble in your shoe, and it's going to hurt every time you take a step. And of course, you're going to remember what leg that was or what foot that was. So that's just a little piece of it. But if you can imagine yourself, gee, if I were no longer alive, but I had to move, where would my center of motion come from?
Right.
With your body, it's usually your core. So your core has to kind of be in charge. And all your appendages, your arms and your legs, they better go along with it. Maybe sometimes they'll flop around a little bit, but I don't know if that helps, Josh.
Yeah, it did a lot. I hadn't thought about a lot of that. That's very good. That's very interesting. So, is there anything that you want to tell the viewers about that you have coming up, or you want to let them know about any like website or anything like that?
Well, I can tell you about my website. That's Helizombie, HELIZOMBIE.com. And that has some of my upcoming appearances. And I've had a line of T-shirts and hoodies and tank tops and, autograph photos for autographing and things of that nature. Also, I'm on Facebook at Jim Krut, Krut. And people can always friend me or just check out the site and see what's going on in my life.
Awesome. Well,
aside from that, I've got about 3 films that I'll be working on between now and the next couple months. I can't really tell you much about them at this point.
Okay. That's great. Good for you. That's awesome. Well, thank you very, very much, Mr. Jim. It has been really, really fun talking to you, and I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Josh. It's been a lot of fun here, too. Good luck, and stay scared.